Good morning, guests, and welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Remembrance Day edition. It's pretty quiet around the hotel today. Kate Hammer is still on leave, and our good friend Mike McDonald is also away this week, enjoying a hard-earned vacation, so that leaves me. But even when the hotel is quiet, BC politics is a busy place. Later in the strategy suite, we're going to have two very savvy members of the legislature press gallery, CBC's Katie DeRosa and Wolfgang Depner of the Canadian Press, to help me break down the last week's events, and there are many. Premier David Eby spoke to the First Nations leadership gathering as the reverberations of the Cowichan decision rumbled on. He signed a major declaration upholding the tanker ban, and he's getting ready for his party's biennial convention, which is coming up this weekend. The federal budget dropped. Was there anything for BC? No pipeline battles in our future. We'll see, because the Prime Minister's heading back to Prince Rupert in the next day or so. More turmoil in the BC Conservative Party with new demands for John Rustad to step aside. And newly minted Green Party leader Emily Lowen winds up her first month on the job and heads out on a province-wide tour. So we'll take a look at her and what I guess I can call some of the none of the above MLAs. They're not Conservative, NDP, or Green, that are multiplying quickly a year after the election. And of course, Emily Lowen herself is not yet an MLA, so complicated time for those folks. But before we get to those issues, my guest today is Raj Sihota, and she's on her second visit to Hotel Pacifico. Raj, you were one of our early guests here at the hotel, and we thank you for that. And like last week's guest, former BC Liberal Cabinet Minister Todd Stone, Raj's roots are in the great interior city of Kamloops, which has produced a wealth of political talent. Now Senior Vice President for the Western Region of Strategies 360, Raj is a respected government relations consultant and advisor with more than 20 years of experience, both at the legislature and in senior leadership roles in the New Democratic Party. She served on the board of the nonpartisan Canadian Women Voters Congress and chaired the Women's Campaign School, which brings together organizers and elected women from all parties to encourage and train women to run for office. In 2014, she became Deputy Director of the BC NDP and then rose to Executive Director in 2017, a job she held until 2020. So she knows a thing or two about NDP conventions. We have an NDP convention starting in just a few days in Victoria. And all conventions are important, but this one seems especially significant for a few reasons. One of which, of course, is it's the first gathering since last year's election, where Premier Eby won re-election with a single seat majority, and he only won that last seat by a mere 27 votes. So welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Raj. If anybody can help us through the complexities and issues of an NDP convention, it's you.
Well, it's so good to be back, Geoff. Thank you for having me on again. And I'm so glad that you raised how close the election was last year, because I was certainly going to start with that. The NDP is meeting 1 year after almost losing government. And so this convention is very, very important in terms of how the party moves forward in this minority government. And New Democrats, unlike the political parties that are dividing in the House every day, New Democrats have been a solid force in this province for many, many decades. This is the 48th NDP convention, I believe. So consistently, decade after decade, these conventions shape public policy in British Columbia. And so much of the platform and the policy ideas that New Democrats take into government are often formed on the party floor, at convention floors. And so New Democrats from all 93 constituencies in British Columbia will gather this weekend, where there'll be vigorous policy debates, lots of socializing. It's a very, family reunion type atmosphere as well. People don't see each other throughout the year. There's virtual meetings, but, hundreds, probably close to 800 delegates will be gathered in Victoria in person, conducting the party business, which is, for the MLAs who spend all their time there, this is a place where they take a back seat to the party leadership and the structure of the party. And it's a place where they listen to what the grassroots of the party have to say to them.
Well, I think it's, in my experience, and I haven't been a member of other parties, so I can't compare, but looking at other parties, it feels to me that the convention is less critical in their political lives than it is for New Democrats. That's my perception. You're a New Democrat, so you'll probably agree. But really, there isn't another party in the BC legislature in the moment that has been around as long as as the BC NDP has, and now in government, as you say, for its third term. This is a combination of circumstances that we haven't encountered before. What, from the standpoint of a provincial director, it's a huge organizational job. The delegates themselves are elected in their own constituencies. Just sketch for us how big a job it is to put such an event together and what kind of thinking has to go into it.
For sure. So any member of the New Democratic Party is allowed to stand as a convention delegate. So to be selected as a convention delegate, you would attend your local constituency association meeting where you live. And then there are, of course, not every member can go to convention. There's a limited number of space for the convention hall. So, through the 93 constituencies, about 900 people will go to convention. Delegates are decided based on the membership list at the time. So it's prorated in terms of how many members in the constituency. And for the party itself, it's a huge undertaking. It is several days of a convention, a large event. There are limited places in British Columbia where you can hold conventions of this size. So they're held in Vancouver or they're held in Victoria, and this one's in Victoria. And maybe Whistler is the only other place that can hold a convention this size. I mean, basically, it's wherever UBCM happens is where an NDP convention can happen. So it's not a small undertaking. It has to be very professional. The staging, the lights, the branding, because this is an opportunity for people to see what the organizational capacity of the party is as well. So for inside convention watchers, they'll be looking for those things as well, the smoothness of the business, the kinds of speeches that are taking place, and just how the flow, and does it make sense, and are people happy? Are they feeling taken care of? Are there debates that are happening on the floor that'll sort of impact, the social activities for the rest of the weekend? But what it does mean is that there's a huge responsibility in terms of what the delegates have in their packages. This is going to be a paperless convention, and this is a new thing. It used to be in conventions of old.
Paperless, holy smoke. No binder?
No binder. And Geoff, you'll know in conventions of old, you'd get a cloth bag, because this is an NDP convention. You'd have a cloth bag, and in your cloth bag would be your resolutions book, which is, quite a thick document for an NDP convention, because of course all the constituencies send in resolutions that are then prioritized and debated at the convention floor. And then, in your convention package, you have the variety of postcards with advertisements of the socials and anything that people want to share. Sometimes labor unions have books or pamphlets, or this past year we've had Rod Mickelberg's John Horgan book come out. So Judy also had a book this year. So I think you'll see a lot of that. There's a lot of
Hmm.
celebration about our history and about where we're going. And I think, over the last few years, a lot of work has been done by folks in the party to also remind the younger members of where the party has come from. Because, for some younger folks, the NDP has been in power for much of their lives, and they've forgotten all the years in opposition. So because mostly when you Democrats gather, we gather in opposition in this province. So
Yeah,
it's very
you and I
rare.
remember that part.
We do.
Guests, today we're getting into the nitty-gritty of sovereign AI. We're talking about stacks and nodes, two little words with big computing power that act as the building blocks for presenting sponsor TELUS's new sovereign AI factory in Rimouski, Quebec. Think of AI stacks as a human body. Just as your heart, lungs, and brain each serve a vital purpose, AI stacks are composed of layers of technology that handle different functions and work together to run the system. An AI stack breaks down the complex functions of an AI factory into manageable parts: hardware, storage, security, networking, applications. These components work together to enable efficient and scalable AI implementation. When TELUS talks about its AI factory being, quote, sovereign by design, they mean that sovereignty is built into every layer of the AI stack, ensuring all components of the factory are under Canadian control. Now, let's zoom in on the brain of the operation: If AI stacks are the organs, nodes are like neurons. A human brain has around 86 billion neurons, each connecting to thousands of others, creating an intricate network capable of solving complex problems. AI nodes function the same way. They connect and communicate to process data. But while our human neurons have their limits, AI nodes can scale indefinitely and process data at superhuman speeds. And at the Sovereign AI Factory in Rimouski, Quebec, TELUS is using advanced GPUs from NVIDIA for those AI nodes, which are capable of performing trillions of calculations per second. But more on that later. Next week, we're diving into NVIDIA's world-leading AI technology and their role in TELUS's Sovereign AI Factory.
Just before we get to some of the specific procedural events, because there's going to be a vote on whether or not there should be a leadership review, and I want to come back to that. I recall always a lot of deep anxiety about the resolutions, both in the Premier's office and in the party structure itself, because as you say, we used to need a big three-ring binder, not a little duotang. It was a real binder that had hundreds of resolutions in it sometimes, all carefully structured, but only a handful actually can be debated because that's just how much time there is. So there's a lot of toing and froing and behind the scenes and on the floor battling over which resolutions get debated. Have you heard anything about potentially troublesome ones or interesting ones coming forward this time?
Well, I mean, I think overall this year, you've seen particularly the labor movement, elements of the labor movement be quite vocal in terms of jobs and industrial strategy here in BC. So, I mean, I think we will see a very
Build
activist.
BC ferries in BC, for example.
Exactly, BC Ferries and particularly BC Ferries. So I think you'll see an activist labor caucus, probably more activists than we've seen in previous conventions over the last few years. I mean, because these are big issues and these are huge jobs for BC. So naturally, I think the labor debate is always worth paying attention to at the BC NDP conventions, and often, the NDP has very strong committees that do the work in between conventions. They meet, they do outreach. And so the work of prioritizing the resolutions happens in conjunction with those committees. So it's not a totally cold process in terms of how resolutions get prioritized at convention, but there is absolutely no way to get through all the resolutions that have been submitted. So they have to be prioritized for the
Yeah, I
plenary.
agree with your earlier comment that the debate on the convention floor will shape government policy, but only in a general way and in the coming platform. It's not a decision that the government should do X or Y, and some convention delegates will feel that's the case. I mean, I remember, and this is something you and I talked about beforehand, it's a Kamloops story that really dominated a convention I guess it was in the 90s, but was a 6 Mile Ranch thing, a question about whether or not land near Kamloops or on the edge of Kamloops should be taken out of the agricultural land reserve. And it really tore the convention apart from top to bottom, as I recall. And the government of the day, which I think was Glenn Clark's government, that's the one I was working in the Premier's office at that time, managed to get Dave Barrett, the first NDP Premier, to come out of retirement to speak on that occasion to try to manage it. So it can have consequences in the present, although it's not supposed to. I'm not sure if there's any such issues there today. Do you think there are?
Not with the kind of passion that I think the NDP used to debate these issues in the 90s. I think the New Democrats are a much more disciplined group of people. And I think I've heard others say, well, it used to be, especially with the Barrett government in the 90s, that we didn't think we'd be there for very long. So there was just,
Hmm.
they just had to
It's
get
more
things
urgent.
done. It was more, and members thought it was more urgent, right? You knew when we were going to get back into government. So, so I think those very exciting policy conventions that I remember in the 90s in government, those it's just not the same. It just those really divisive debates on the convention floor. I think the NDP is just a much more disciplined party, and those things get resolved before they hit the floor most often.
Well, but the emergency resolutions are still a wild card. I mean, at the last convention, came quite soon on the heels of the Hamas attacks, the terror attacks against Israel. And there was a debate about that, which ultimately resulted in a unified convention supporting a resolution that spoke both to the situation in Israel, but also to the attacks that were then already unfolding in Gaza. So that was a real time on the floor debate. But like you, I haven't heard of such a thing that's coming this time. So we'll have to stay tuned for that. Um, we don't see an old growth debate like we had a few years ago. I don't hear too much about LNG, which was another potential one on the floor at a couple of conventions I was at, what to do on that front. I mean, after John Horgan won the leadership, having said he supported LNG, that was kind of the end of that conversation, although there were lots of people who were unhappy about it, or Site C. So that gets us to the peculiar part of this one, because it doesn't happen every time, is the leadership review vote. Can you explain to people how that goes? Because some political leaders have really run into trouble on this front in the recent months elsewhere.
Sure. So New Democrats vote on the approval or disapproval of their leader at every convention. So this is not a special vote. This is a part of the regular business at convention, and it usually takes place on the Saturday. And every leader has been subject to this vote since the late 2000s, 2009, somewhere in there.
Hmm.
And I think there has been for this convention quite a bit of talk about what those leadership numbers for the premier might look like. And part of that is due to the closeness of the election last year. And then you look at the Rustad situation. I just think it's more front and center, the leadership, the vote, and people talking about it than it has been for the previous few conventions with John Horgan.
Well, the vote is 50% plus one in practical terms, but in political terms, it varies a lot. We hear a lot of conversation about that. And Rob Shaw of CHEC, I guess it was in business in Vancouver, had done some research, and you and I did some similar research to look at what had happened in the past, because we saw John Rustad scrape through his with the low 70s, right, which he's insisting is way more than 50% plus one. So that's that. We'll come back to him, I guess, later in the show. But my numbers were that John Horgan was acclaimed leader in a convention in 2014. In the 2015 convention, he had a 95% support, which was before he got elected premier. In 2019, it was up a tiny bit, 96.4. It dropped back down to 83% in 2021. What do you think, in a practical way, is the number that David Eby's team will be looking for?
If I were them, I'd be looking for a number between 70 and 80. I think that would be, I think 90 it could be a very tall order for this
Yeah,
convention. I
I
mean,
agree.
the government has been in power for a number of years. Premier hasn't always made the most popular decisions amongst all party members, so there'll be people who won't be happy. It's the only chance for party members to express these matters. Horgan's 83%, that
That'd
would
be
be good.
fabulous, really.
Yeah.
But I think you made a good point in our conversation before the show, which is constitutional amendment is 75%. And,
It
so
is.
somewhere in that territory signifies, you know, a very important vote, but that's enough on a constitutional amendment, which is usually hard fought. And I don't see, to be candid, any organized opposition to David Eby. I think there's some grumpiness and some people who are grousing, but I think in some respects his situation's improved over the fall compared to where it was, say, at the end of the spring term. Is that your view too?
I think the premiers, the last few months have been much stronger than the earlier months in the year. So if this convention was held in May, I think that it would have, those numbers would be lower. But I think the last few months, the premier does seem to have righted some of those numbers, public opinion polls, and also trying to be a bit more on mark with what party members might want to hear, particularly on the social side of things. So I think some work is being undertaken by the Premier's office to do some outreach related to this convention. and related to the leadership. So it's good to see them engage in this way. It's important. It's important to engage with the party. And convention matters. It matters to a lot of people who take a very active interest in our party, who are the donors, who are the supporters, who are the members, and they don't gather every year. The NDP only gathers every 2 years. So this won't happen again until very close to, if we have go the full mandate, until very close to the next election. So it is a pivotal moment for
Yeah.
the premier, and I think they are taking it seriously.
Well, I think that there was, as you say, an unhappy feeling, but not a coherent organizational push to try to get a yes vote. We should have a leadership review. There's nothing like that I detect in the wind. And I think, as you say, the premier's personal approval ratings continue to be very resilient, and his gap with the Conservatives is widening. And although John Rustad's doing the premier a huge favor by continuing the chaos in the Conservative Party, I don't think you can say that the premier's success is due only to the failures of the opposition. I agree with you that there's been more work done, like the settlement of the public service strike, I think will make it easier on the convention floor, but it wasn't really hurting the government anyway, so we'll see. The big tests are still to come with the implementation of the budget. And there'll be anxiety, I think, on the floor about the austerity that's coming and the changes that may flow from the decision to try to reduce the deficit as a share of GDP. Nobody's quite sure what that will look like. But for all of those reasons, I think David Eby probably going to be fine. And I agree with you. Somewhere in the 70s, mid 70s, constitutional amendment level would be absolutely fine.
And we should also point out that the party is, as they go into convention, in exceptional shape.
Yes.
Fundraising is going very well. They continue to out fundraise the opposition. And most quarters, the opposition's combined, the party is out fundraising both of them. And so, when the premier says, he's ready to fight an election, I mean, literally the party is ready to fight an election resource wise. I mean, obviously there's a process for nominating candidates and so forth. And that bodes well, right? It shows you that people are donating. People still believe that he's doing a good job, and they believe the government is doing a good job, because you would certainly see the impact, on the fundraising side if people were truly unhappy.
Yeah, that's a really critical barometer. If it starts to go down, you have to listen closely to what that message means, because it's real and it's hard to turn around.
When it comes to shipping, the word bunkering might sound like something out of a war movie. In reality, it simply means fueling a ship. And for more than a century, that fuel has been heavy oil or diesel. But there's a better option. LNG, liquefied natural gas, is natural gas cooled until it becomes a liquid. In this form, it's compact enough to fuel large ships. Earlier this year, BC made history. The Silver Nova, a state-of-the-art cruise ship, became the first vessel bunkered with LNG in Vancouver, supplied by FortisBC's Tilbury facility in Delta. FortisBC isn't new to this. Riding on a ferry between Tsawwassen and Victoria, good chance that ferry is running on LNG provided by FortisBC. There are 10 marine vessels that are fueled with LNG, 6 for BC Ferries and 4 with Seaspan. It's part of a growing global shift to lower emission shipping. They've safely completed more than 78,000 LNG bunkering operations for customers here in BC. These examples show what's possible right here in Vancouver. But here's the challenge. Unless Canada builds the infrastructure, we risk falling behind ports in the US or Asia that are already fueling LNG-powered vessels. Without infrastructure to support these larger vessels, Canada could miss out on the economic and environmental benefits of becoming a global LNG fueling hub. The Tilbury facility has an advantage. It produces some of the lowest carbon intensity LNG in the world, thanks to hydroelectricity produced in BC. Expanding that capacity would not only support shipping here at home, but it would also put Canada on the map as a leader in the international transition to lower carbon marine fuels. Because shipping isn't just about moving people and goods, it's about moving them responsibly. And the opportunity is at our doorstep. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Talk a bit about provincial council and that election because it's a bit complicated. We see Aaron Shimahatsa, who's the incumbent party president, he's been there for a number of years, has decided to focus on other endeavors, so he's stepping aside. And what do you see coming on that front?
So my understanding that there's more than one campaign for president, but I think the lead for probably go to Amin Singh, who's the former MLA for Richmond, Queensborough, and he's seeking the party presidency, and he has a strong slate of candidates that are running with them, and for the NDP executive, it's a combination of regional representatives and then people who are elected by the whole convention. There's 10 members on the NDP executive and 10 table officers, and all of them will be elected by the folks at convention this weekend.
Yeah, I've looked through the list of people who are running for these jobs, and from what I can tell, it's a very experienced and seasoned group of folks who will provide a lot of leadership. And I mean, that sounds like a spin, but it makes a big difference. I think people really underestimate the importance of the party executive to any organization. We can certainly see the trouble that John Rustad's having on his side because his team is not united at the executive level or even the constituency level. So that's not going to be the case. It's not going to be the case here.
Yeah. No, well, the NDP has always had very strong governance as a party, right? The party takes governance very seriously. And I'm really impressed with the group of people running for the executive. This is a well-rounded group of people, and having any of them elected will be really important for the next campaign because this is the group that's responsible for the mechanics of how the next campaign runs, how the fundraising goes, what the priorities are in terms of supporting MLAs in getting ready for the next election. So it's not a small task. It's quite time consuming as well, Geoff, as you know.
Mhm.
You've been around many conventions and many executives that have been elected, and you know how much time it takes for people, especially when there's something big going on. And I don't just mean campaigns, but in internal governance, people are really devoted and they take it very seriously.
Yeah, and I think when there's a crisis, as there is from time to time on fronts, that group is very key. And looking down the list of people, and I'm not sure if there's going to be competing slates, as you say, there's a contest for president, but uh, a really strong group coming forward there. I don't agree with the suggestion. I think it was made by Rob Shaw that um, there's some tone of criticism of the premier in the makeup of the group. I would say it's more of a pro-party uh, democracy view there. There's not a list of people who are saying what can we do about Premier Eby. So people looking for leadership criticism in that group are not going to find it unless there's something new that comes forward. That's my call anyway.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And I've had over the last few weeks interactions with people who are running for the executive, and that's not my sense at all. I think people want to help. They have experience, they have time, and they want to be part of it. So, and I don't think the groups that are coming together to run for the executive, I don't think it is an anti-EB slate of any kind. I think people are very supportive of the party direction and want to support getting us through to the next election.
If you were getting a call from the premier's office about advice for his speech, what would you say to them?
Um, I mean, I would say you just make it as human as possible. I mean, I think it has been a very tough year for a lot of British Columbians, and some of them will be at convention. It's been a very tough year in forestry. The noise south of the border and the impact on our economy is real. And so I think the premier this weekend has to show that he understands that pain, how hard it is for people to make ends meet, and that there are real headwinds coming our way, and that he has a responsible plan to take us through. And as you and Geoff, you raised a really important point, is that there is a very large deficit in Victoria. Change will have to come because it's not sustainable, in my view, in the shape that it is right now. And those will be tough decisions that the Premier and the Finance Minister and the team have to make. So he can't be in denial about those decisions either. I think there's a level of candor that you have to give to party members about it can't all be about everything is okay and this is great and we're going to go and fight the next election. There are real challenges with the economy in British Columbia, and those are serious matters, and he has to be able to foreshadow what he's doing about that and how he will continue to protect the services that people count on.
Yeah, I think that's solid advice. And I think the other challenge for him and his speechwriters is to make sure that it feels like an NDP speech, not a speech that's giving tough love to the base because we're in the real world and maybe you're not. I mean, I think that as the government faces the budget crisis, it's got to demonstrate its adherence to the values that are bringing these hundreds of people to Victoria, and signal that that's still an issue and a concern for them. Because if there is some unhappiness out there, that's where it comes from. It comes from a concern that maybe New Democrats aren't going to be able to govern as New Democrats in the face of some of these fiscal challenges. And I think that's a very difficult hurdle for any premier to get over in a speech, but that's one that's in front of him as he prepares for this weekend. I think he's got to reassure the rank and file that it's an NDP project and we're not just being driven by events.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Um, but the other challenge I'm here does have is that, you and I have been spent a lot of time in opposition, and one of the challenges for the NDP is that they haven't always been seen as strong fiscal managers.
Right.
And a lot of work was done over the last decade, particularly with Carol James and Selena Robinson as finance ministers, John Horgan as premier, to be better at the fiscal management, to be really, really good at fiscal management, in fact. And I think, I'm a bit of a moderate, middle of the road New Democrat when it comes to finances. And I think for my New Democratness, this is something that needs to be wrangled. And it's important to the future credibility of NDP governments to be able to do that. And I think that is a huge challenge, and one that I would like to see the premier address seriously and in a way that speaks to party members who are also talking about it. I'm not alone in this.
Mm-hmm. Well, and nobody's really sure about what the magnitude of the solutions might be. If you look at healthcare and keeping emergency rooms open, if we look at earlier in the fall, that was a very, very present issue of emergency rooms being closed around the province. They're not all open yet, of course. Similarly, getting a family doctor, that situation is improving, but it's very, very expensive. So I think, I'm very concerned about childcare and making sure that that continues going forward in a good way. And everybody at that convention is going to have their own particular concern. So a political challenge, I think, for Premier Eby in terms of that speech. But do you think it's a tougher convention than others have been in the past? Or are we just making a lot of it because we've been so close to it? It feels tougher to me.
It feels tougher to me in that there is so much talk about what the leadership vote might say. And I think it's
Hmm.
also tougher in that, they are in a minority government, but the opposition is in complete disarray. I mean, one of the things that I was able to say when I was provincial director is, we're in a minority government. Get out there, raise money. You never know when we might have to go to an election. And so I think there's a sense that sometimes there's a bit of complacency with the opposition being in such disarray on sort of on that election readiness front. But we can't forget it is a minority government. I mean, this is still, despite the opposition being in disarray. I mean, when you look at some of those public polling numbers, I mean, it could be a very, very close election, the next one. And
Hmm.
so I think New Democrats shouldn't forget that either. I mean, part of the way that we get good things done for people is to be able to win elections, to be able to govern, and to be able to do that. And so we shouldn't lose, our eyes on that
Yeah, it
either.
was a one vote majority, but very close to a minority, and it's unclear how voters would respond on a whole number of fronts to what's happening right now. So I agree with you. Probably not a time to trigger an election if you don't need to, but at the same time, when Premier Eby says, I've got this core piece of legislation, it involves delivering electricity to the Northwest, and I'm going to treat it as a confidence matter. I don't think that's unfair ball at all. I think if it's that important to the government or to the future of the province, that's fair enough for an election issue. Whether it's the correct one or not, I think we have to have a longer conversation. But I agree with you completely. It's more stable perhaps than a true minority, but not much. And 27 votes is pretty quick, pretty small swing.
And it'll be noticeable at convention. There'll be less MLAs, right, at this
Hmm.
convention than the
Hmm.
last one. So we're closer to the 2017 situation than we are the 2020, and that will be noticeable. So yes, we are. New Democrats are in government, and it's rare to go to convention when the NDP is in government, but to stay there. That will be the work of the premier. And because as I've said, the party is in really good shape in terms of election readiness. So it's the main message carrier that will be the focus of this convention.
Right. Very interesting. Well, thanks so much, Raj. Very expert inside view and a political take on it that I'm sure our listeners found very interesting. But thanks again for visiting Hotel Pacifico. Great to see you again.
Good to be here. Thanks so much, Geoff.
When it comes to dairy, quality matters. And in Canada, we hold ourselves to some of the highest standards in the world. The milk you drink here is tested for quality and produced under rigorous animal care programs using sustainable farming practices. Most importantly, unlike in the United States, milk in Canada is guaranteed to be free of artificial growth hormones. Every carton, every block of cheese, every tub of yogurt is backed by a food system designed to protect families, not cut corners. And supply management is what makes that possible. By keeping production local and stable, it gives us the confidence that what ends up on our table is safe, fresh, and trustworthy. In a time when Canadians are paying closer attention than ever to health, nutrition, and food safety, that peace of mind matters. Supply management isn't just about economics or trade. It's about making sure the food we rely on every day meets the highest standards. Supply management delivers for BC families. A message from BC Dairy.
Okay, well, lots to think about for Premier David Eby as he prepares for convention. And to help us see the bigger picture, we have two press gallery veterans with us this week. Katie DeRosa, provincial affairs reporter for CBC News, formerly the Vancouver Sun. And you've been on Hotel Pacifico before, Katie, so
I
thanks
have
for
been.
coming
Thanks
back.
for having
Yes,
me,
great to
Geoff.
see you again. Wolfgang Depner, I don't know if you're a veteran of the press gallery, but a veteran reporter, formerly
Yeah, I
with
was about to say I'm not a veteran. I'm going on. I'm in year 3 of this place. It feels like year 30, though. I must admit.
well, by press gallery standards, you're still in kindergarten, given
Yeah,
the Keith
absolutely.
Baldry and Von Palmer
Mhm.
characters that are still there. But you did 6 years with Black Press. Now you're a legislative reporter for the Canadian Press. I worked for the Canadian Press one time, long, long time ago. But I think most importantly, you're the man who asked John Rustad after the caucus cell phone shakedown controversy whether or not he was paranoid. And Brad Zubik, Rustad's chief of staff, said that would be the end of your career, but you're still here. So
I'm
we're
still
delighted
here,
to
but
have you.
it's early days yet.
Well, it is, yeah. The wrath of Zubik may still strike you. So let's start with where we left off with Raj Sihota, which is the upcoming BC NDP convention. It's been a year since the election. What's the mood? What are you picking up? How do you think David Eby's doing? Maybe Wolfgang, you start.
Okay, right. So I think David Eby is doing as well as he can under the circumstances that he's facing. And of course, the circumstances, number one, is the sort of the state of the economy. And at the risk of too much psychologizing, I would say that back in about a year ago, he talked about sort of wanting to get the economy going again, and I don't think that has happened yet, and that's not necessarily his fault. He's struggling against circumstances that are outside of his control, and in light of those, he's doing as well as he can. Now, conservatives will quickly point out that this government has been in power for several years now. So I won't deny that some of these situations that the current state is also a reflection of past NDP policies, and that has to be acknowledged. But it is, I think, the premier is doing as well as he can under the circumstances that are in front of him.
Does that fit your view too, Katie?
Well, I really think, first of all, I think this NDP convention is going to be a postmortem on the election. It's been a year, but let's not forget that David Eby almost lost to the upstart BC Conservatives, which had previously polled at 2%. So I don't think that's behind him. I think there's going to be, and we're already talking about the next election. So I think the convention is going to focus on both a postmortem and an election readiness strategy. How could we prevent this from happening? And I think that just having negotiated, a settlement, an agreement with BCGEU, the labor movement of the NDP is not going to forget the 8 weeks that strike dragged out. There was the memes about Finance Minister Brenda Bailey. Where's Brenda? Kind of depicting her as where's Waldo? A dig at her availability for those negotiations. But I think the question is going to be, why did it take 8 weeks to get to pretty much a place in the middle? I know Vince Reddy is seen as kind of the Vince Reddy bat signal, but they really kind of met in the middle ground. And why did it take 8 weeks to get there? I think the labor wing of the NDP is going to be asking that question. And is EB leaving a sour taste in the mouth of the other public sector unions that are going to be negotiating, the nurses, the teachers, other public sector workers? So, and another thing I think that he's going to be facing is the environmental wing of the party, which still exists, even though we haven't really talked about it since the Anjali Appadurai situation, since she was disqualified from running against EB. But the environmental wing is going to say, what about climate change? What about our climate goals? All we are talking about is LNG and, resource development, mining, but where are the climate goals? So I would bet that that's going to be a big topic.
Yeah, if I could add to that last comment from Katie, I live in a green riding. I live in Sydney, BC. That's a riding held by Rob Botterill of the BC Greens. And I had a chance to talk to people on the ground there, including a delegate who's going to be at the convention. And this delegate has made the point that the party is losing a little bit of faith, is perhaps the wrong term, but is sort of concerned about the direction of the party on environmental issues. This delegate told me that the party was able to attract new members in that riding, but a lot of those new members have sort of dropped off because of some of the environmental policies. Now, that might be just sort of a local reaction, but it is, and just to add to Katie's point, this is the environmentalists are a key element of the NDP coalition, along with unions and First Nations, and the strike. Sort of the strike was in many ways strike three against that coalition. The BC NDP angered First Nations, angered environmentalists in the spring, and then, as Katie pointed out, in the fall, it had a bit of a run-in with the unions, not just on the strike. The strike was obviously the big one, but also on things like the contract for the new BC ferries going to China.
But the previous poll numbers are, I would say, surprisingly resilient. And of course, the conservative numbers are now showing some decline as a result of the wear and tear on Rustad's leadership. Does he deserve any credit for that, or is he largely benefiting from the turmoil in the Conservatives?
I'm going to quote Napoleon here: "Never stop your enemy from making mistakes." So EB is certainly just letting this sort of play out a little bit, and I'm sure we're going to get to that letter from this group of conservative constituency associations from Burnaby,
Tri-Cities, yeah.
And that letter makes, among other points, the point that, look, if there's an election today, we're going to lose, even though the NDP has, at least in the minds of conservatives, done these and these things. So to some degree, the conservatives are scoring own goals one after another, and EB is just letting them do their thing.
Well, I mean,
Okay,
I would argue that because the BC Conservatives are in such turmoil, it is easy to perhaps lose sight of some of the challenges the NDP is having. And this convention is the first time that we'll really get to put a lens on that. So I think David Eby has skated above some of the controversies. But remember how angry some of his base were, especially the younger members of the NDP base were, when the premier said that the homeless shelters and food banks were being filled up with newcomers. Katrina Chen spoke against him. There was a lot of and the comments underneath her post were NDP faithful. So I don't think that comment has gone away. He never walked it back or qualified it. So I think I think EB has enjoyed that support, but that's not to dismiss the potential rifts bubbling under the surface. I mean, I would guess his leadership review numbers will be better than Rustad. Rustad got about 70%. I think EB is going to do better than that, but I think there might be some dissent, and he may not be in the 90% threshold, which is where he was in the 2023 convention.
The Port of Vancouver is used to shifting conditions, and this moment is a shift like no other. Trade rules are being rewritten. We need to adapt to move more of what Canadians make, grow, harvest, and mine to more customers around the world. And the biggest opportunity for Canadian businesses? Selling more to Indo-Pacific markets, a region that will make up half the globe's GDP by 2040. That's billions of customers in Japan, South Korea, China, who want what Canadians make to feed families, build cities, and power economies. The good news? The Port of Vancouver is uniquely poised to step up. Why? Diversification and First Nations partnerships have long been its strength, and its growth plans are designed to meet this moment. And with one-of-a-kind projects, like Roberts Bank Terminal 2 set to build new industrial land, unlock $100 billion of container trade capacity annually, and create tens of thousands of construction, longshore, logistics, and other jobs, it's ready. Because it's not just about moving goods. It's about moving Canada forward to deliver the true north far and wide. To learn how the Port Authority and its partners are working to deliver for Canada, visit portvancouver.com/delivering for Canada.
Katie, what's the mood you're hearing from caucus members in Victoria? We saw Gary Begg lose his cabinet spot for was not clear exactly why, and now has become elected the caucus chair. Should we read anything into that? What are you hearing from MLAs, or if anything?
Well, I mean, it depends on. I think there's some MLAs who are firmly behind him and say, he is our chance of winning the next election. But there's EB's also faced criticism of really centralizing power in his office, perhaps not listening to the ideas of more junior members of his caucus, of which there are many. So it's like the question is if he's bringing enough MLAs along when he has these grand visions. So I think that we'll have to. It is harder to get candidness from some of those caucus members compared to members at large and delegates. But I think we'll perhaps see on some of the resolutions that come forward what the mood is. Whether there's Aman Singh, who's a former MLA, running as the alternative to current party president Aaron Shulametska. What's his going to how he's going to fare. I think that's going to be interesting, and we interested to see if Aman has a different approach from where the party's going right now. So I think the caucus is appearing united, definitely more united than the BC Conservatives are appearing. But I'm sure that we'll find rifts if we dig a bit further.
Let's take a look at the Conservatives, and maybe Wolfgang, you mentioned this letter from constituency presidents. Did it really rock Rustad? I mean, it seemed to happen and then go away. It was obviously part of a continued effort to unseat him, but he just seems to be determined to stay in place.
Yeah, I mean, the question that I have is what is this letter going to accomplish that the letter from the party's management committee failed to accomplish? recall that the first letter that came out in October included appeals from board members that Rustad himself had sort of shepherded into those positions back in the spring. And if that didn't make an impression on him, a letter from a group of writing association presidents, from former candidates in yes, admittedly suburban ridings, is not going to push him out. So he has, I think, retained his power. Is he as powerful as he used to be? I would say no. But to some degree, he has turned out to be a survivor. He has managed to withstand some of the slings and arrows sort of sent his way. And I think to some degree, we have to generally acknowledge a level of political skill that might not be readily visible to the public. The public sees stories about the letters and blackmailing and phones being checked and so on. But behind the scene, we have to acknowledge that he has kept things together. Back after the dismissal of Sturko. After all the revelations have come out around blackmails and again these phone checks, everybody thought, oh, Rustad is on his way out, but he's still with us, and one has to absolutely acknowledge that.
Well, Katie, you pointed out the names that were under Katrina Chen's criticism of Premier Eby with regard to temporary foreign workers. I was equally struck by the names that were critical of John Rustad when he fired, I think her name was Lindsay Shepard, one of the researchers, and was criticized directly by Aaron Gunn and Isha Esty and I think Herman Bangu, people who were key to the success he had a year ago. Are they still supporting him for leader and just criticizing him on that point, or do we have any idea?
I mean, I definitely think if you watch Herman Bangu on Twitter, he is silently campaigning for his own leadership campaign. So is Caroline Elliott. Like, there are big names who are making their position known on certain topics that they think Rustad has been weak on. And so I certainly, it's interesting because the criticism of, his firing of Lindsay Shepard is that he caved to the woke mob and, that he was
cancel culture.
Yes, yeah. Cancel culture. So that was sort of the right flank of the party criticizing him. But then, when he ousted Eleanor Sturko, the more centrists were criticizing him. The language he used when Amelia Boltby left and basically criticizing her mental health, that received criticism from no matter nonpartisan, whatever side of the party you're on, that received a lot of criticism. So he is under attack from all sides of his party. But as Wolf pointed out, he's managed to hang on, mostly because there's really no mechanism after the leadership review to remove him. But I spoke to one conservative about that letter from the riding associations, and they said it was more of a jab than a knockout punch. So it was just like adding to the drip, 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 but it wasn't, a big, knockout. So I think there's a mood to just get through this session, get through Christmas, and then maybe reassess, especially now that Eby is waiving the prospect of an early election. I've heard a lot of people say that is potentially a political strategy from Eby to keep Rustad in that position while he flounders with these, political infighting. And I think that's probably correct because no one wants to have a leadership review if Eby is dangling the prospect of an early election.
Yeah, I think go ahead, Wolfgang.
Yeah, sorry. Credit towards due. Von Palmer has made the argument that Rustad remains in leadership because a leadership contest would be so divisive that it would blow up the party. Katie already pointed to the various factions within the party. You have the more moderate types that have found it more difficult to work under Rustad. Then you have the more sort of People's Party of Canada wing within the Conservative Party of BC, and in to some degree, Rustad manages to bridge those two factions by essentially making everyone clear: if I'm out, we're looking at a pretty nasty leadership contest that's going to bring out some of the quote unquote crazies, and that could sort of further destabilize the party. The other factor to consider in all of this is that the party had just gone through a leadership review. To go through another one after a leadership contest that drew very little interest. It should be said that there were 8,000 party members, 1,200 voted. Rustad won 900 of them. Okay, so I don't see much appetite within the party to go through another process that would be even that would generate even that could potentially generate even less enthusiasm than the last one.
Yeah, it's very confusing for me to follow this. I'll just end the conservative chunk of this commentary by saying, I remember Angela Isidoro telling Jas Johal that this was the new conservative movement, that the idea of a big tent party was kind of obsolete, and the polarization was where they needed to go and would continue to go, because they brushed off the NDP's attacks on the so-called crazies during the campaign, and the NDP's big emphasis on negative advertising on those issues was not harmful to the Conservatives. So they may be drawing a political conclusion that the Gavin Dews and the Trevor Halfords and some of these people who had come from the BC United side are just going to have to play ball and not worry. They don't have any leverage in this conversation, and they'll find their way. But this gets me to the Greens. Let's just change the channel here, Wolfgang, because I'm curious about Emily Lohan. Maybe I shouldn't worry about the Greens, and she's taking a line that we hear more in the United States on the left side of the spectrum about oligarchs and so on. Has she had any impact in her first month on the job? And how is she doing with her other two MLAs, she's not elected, who are a very different style of people? You know, how is the oligarch argument going over in West Vancouver, where Jeremy Valeriot has his base?
Yeah. So if I may start, as a recovering political scientist and philosophy lecturer, I love writing about oligarchies. It's absolutely fantastic. I love bringing those in. I love bringing it in those terms. But to some degree, I would argue that Emily Lohan is shaking things up in ways that we haven't seen for a while. She brings an intellectual sharpness to the debate that we haven't seen for some time. Now, is it going to play well in some of the richer ridings that the Greens have won? I mean, I live in a Green riding, and there are some pretty fancy homes in North Saanich and in Sydney. How is that going to play? I guess time will tell. But I would argue that Emily Lohan is in some ways channeling the David Eby that David Eby was once and would like to be again. So 2 years ago, when he was speaking at the National NDP convention, he talked about the importance of not losing sight of the party's activist roots. Well, guess who's reminding potential New Democrat voters or current New Democrat voters of the party's activist roots, and that's Emily Lohan. And Emily Lohan has also, I think, pulled off quite the feat by getting an endorsement from Grand Chief Stuart Phillip. And I harken back a year ago.
Sephora Berman, David Suzuki.
Yeah. So so a year ago, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip was actively pleading to Green voters in Victoria Beacon Hill to vote for Grace Law. He was standing right next to Premier David Eby, and both of them were actively appealing to would-be Green voters to vote for Grace Law, so that the party can hang on to that riding, while Sonia Furstenau was mounting a challenge in that riding. And now Stuart Phillip has come out and endorsed Emily Lohan doing the leadership run, and that to some degree should worry the NDP when a stalwart NDP supporter is sort of shifting over.
Whose spouse is a member of the caucus, the NDP caucus.
Correct.
But Katie, what's your take? How's Emily Lohan doing?
Well, during the strike, she was very visible on the front lines with striking workers. She made a connection, lots of social media posts, and her message was that the NDP have abandoned the working class, and the Greens were the party for them. So again, if you're looking at potentially discontent within the unions, I think the Greens have an ability to pick up some of those votes. I remember when I interviewed Emily Lowen when she was running, I said, well, who are we talking about? We talk about oligarchs. And, she kind of mentioned Jim Pattison and Chip Wilson and the big oil companies that are, say they're Canadian, but they're actually funded by US hedge funds. And so those are the kind of, I actually think that message is less effective because it's a bit more not as concrete, but seeing her on the picket lines with the union members, that is concrete. And I think that's what landed.
What about her tour and her close associations with some of the First Nations? Is that going to be able to carry her far? I mean, she's Sonia Furstenau represented the Cowichan territory. Basically, that was her riding. And I see Sonia Furstenau working hard, or sorry, Emily Lowen working hard to build out that connection. Do you see prospects for that? We've heard from Wolfgang about Grand Chief Stuart Phillips supporting her. Is there a constituency for the Greens and First Nations?
I might definitely think, especially with the Cowichan decision, there is, because again, the premier has been walking this fine line, which I'm sure we'll talk about more, of agreeing with the argument that the Cowichan was making in that land claim decision in the Richmond area, but also then appealing the decision, which some have seen as a disconnect. So I think that gives Emily Lowen even more of a chance to say, we are putting our full backing behind reconciliation, and the NDP say that they're for reconciliation in theory, but when it comes to it in principle, that's where they have challenges. However, granted, the NDP did broker the Haida decision, and that seemed to be an area where private property rights were not in question at all. But I do think the Greens might be able to capitalize on some discontent within Indigenous nations about the way the NDP have handled the Cowichan decision, especially the Cowichan leaders saying that even the premier, the Richmond mayor are fear mongering. I think that word has been used many times.
So, Katie, just staying with you for a second, talk to us a bit about the other MLAs, all of whom are women, interestingly. So we have Dallas Brody and Tara Armstrong of One BC who've created a party which gives them more resources from the legislature and better access to question period and so on. And then two other independents, Eleanor Sturko and Amelia Boltby. There's yet I'm missing a man.
Jordan Keeley.
Jordan Keeley, yeah. So an exception to the rule. But how are those women doing? All formerly conservatives.
Well, let's talk first about One BC, since we were on the topic of Indigenous, reconciliation. At the First Nations Summit, next to Premier David Eby, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, and several other of the Indigenous leaders called on Dallas Brody to resign. They cited her, they called her language racist. They cited her claim of the reconciliation industry, trying to ban land acknowledgements. So a plethora of things that One BC has said since they became an official party that First Nations leaders say is just beyond the pale. I remember Dallas Brody saying, we're going to name the elephant in the room, the things that people are too afraid to talk about. But, I question to what extent British Columbians feel that those kind of things are going to make life more affordable, like banning land acknowledgements. I just don't know how that's landing. And as for the independents, I think, Eleanor Sturko and Amelia Boltby are trying to find their place in the legislature. They've voted with the NDP several times. They've also not voted with them. And so question or swirling, are they going to form their own party? I don't think they're going to join Centre BC. That doesn't seem to be on the table. So are they going to form their own centrist party? And it just shows the further fracturing of the BC Conservatives.
Yeah, what's your take, Wolfgang? Is there any future for those independents, or are they just going to become footnotes to BC political history?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. If I may briefly come back to One BC, One BC has or is learning lessons from the United States, whereby there is political hate to be made by punching down on groups that can't necessarily defend themselves as well as others. And earlier you spoke about sort of the propensity of BC politics to be polarized. And ONE-BC is definitely looking at sort of stoking divisiveness because in a winner-take-all system, the more extreme your voice, the more likely you are to be heard. I agree with Katie. There is not much to be had in terms of I see little sort of upside in terms of appealing to concerns about affordability. But this is not about, but this is really about stoking a cultural war and sort of setting the stage for the next election when ONE-BC can come out and say, look, we genuinely defended, at least in their minds, private property. We're taking a different tack on reconciliation. In fact, we want to get rid of it. And if you can briefly come back to the constituency letter, the group of riding association presidents is actually accusing Rustad of not being forceful enough on the Cowichan decision. And that's where ONE-BC comes in and say, hey, if you don't like Rustad speaking out on this issue, there's a party for you over here. As for the independents, Eleanor Sturko has a future in politics. The question is where, because she's been a very effective spokesperson for whichever party she's been with. She might just be a radical element in the chemical sense that she can never bond with any particular party. But she has
That's a question in my mind too.
BC politics, I argue, and some of the other ones they will likely end up as footnotes.
Okay, last thing on this general area. Premier Eby was at the First Nations Leadership Gathering, which pulls together all of the First Nations leadership across BC. It's an enormous event. Cabinet meets with them. It's just below the Union of BC Municipalities in terms of importance on the political calendar. And he signed a declaration there with a number of North Coast, I think most North Coast First Nations, including the Haida, the Haisla, and others, demanding that Ottawa uphold the tanker ban, which has been in place in a de facto way for decades, but legally for a number of years since the Justin Trudeau government. And now we see Prime Minister Mark Carney coming out to Prince Rupert later this week to make a further announcement about major projects. What do you think is going to come out of all of these confrontations? Will there be a pipeline to Prince Rupert in the face of this? Katie, why don't you lead off?
Well, so, definitely, I think the declaration that upholding the tanker ban, it was symbolic, but I think it was, rooted in a response to perhaps whispers that the Prime Minister is considering a pipeline. And I go back to when the Prime Minister met with all the premiers in June, right after he won the election. Doug Ford said he was like Santa. He had something for everyone. He's going to go back to the North Pole. He's going to sort us all out. Well, now Santa Carney is trying to give out the gifts, and in terms of major projects, BC got 2 in the first tranche. Alberta, the only thing on their list is the pipeline. And then days after this declaration, we hear Mark Carney say at the Canadian Club in Toronto, it's like a Canada Club, he said Danielle is on line 1 and it's going to happen. And then we all, journalists were perking up, and then he kind of walked it back and said something's going to happen. But that, I think, is a pretty his biggest endorsement yet for a pipeline. So I doubt the announcement in Prince Rupert will be related to that, because Alberta hasn't even submitted their proposal. I think we'll actually see that proposal. They said it's going to come in the spring. So I think a firm answer on a pipeline will actually be next year. But you're right, he's in Prince Rupert, so we'll have to see, is it LNG related? But I definitely think that the Prime Minister is going to be spreading out the gifts, and that he's going to be announcing major projects for other provinces. And again, Alberta just wants one thing.
It could be the transmission line, though, and then pipelines later. Who knows?
Yeah,
anyway,
that's
something
a good
to
call.
talk about next time. Thank you so much to both of you. It's our tradition now at this stage of the show to head off to the mini bar and raise a glass. So I invite, I don't know, Wolfgang, do you want to raise a glass or take a shot at anybody before we say goodbye?
Take a shot at anyone. Well, I got a long list of things, but I would be violating my neutrality requirement here. Katie mentioned it earlier. I think Katie has been in this place longer, so I would say that I think it's up for Katie to acknowledge a soon-to-be past member of the press gallery. So I will defer to her.
No, he deserves multiple. You give a shout out first, Wolf.
All right, so I'll start off. I just want to raise a glass to Richard Zussman, the soon-to-be former legislative correspondent for Global BC. Richard is a must-see at the end of the working day to see where you get scooped. So that's number one in terms of his journalistic qualities. I listened to his Sunday morning show with Keith Baldry, Focus BC, I believe, on a fairly regular basis as well. But Richard's quality as a person exceed those as a journalist. So Richard deserves all the best and all the luck in his new position.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would second that. I actually have two toasts to make. So one to Richard, and he always asks a lot of questions, but the funniest question I ever heard him make was when John Horgan announced Katrina Conroy as the finance minister, and Richard, in a roundabout way, asked why John Horgan picked someone not younger, basically, and then Katrina Conroy had to come up and say, "Are you trying to say he picked someone too old?" And Richard was so red. So I will never forget that moment. But I'm sure Richard, having his charm, he was able to turn it around. But Richard and I have never worked for the same outlet, but again, as a competitor, he's always been so gracious and helping me out as the younger member, I suppose, of the press gallery. And my second cheers is to on Remembrance Day. My CBC colleague Francis Plourde spent some time at the Veterans Memorial Manor in Vancouver, which is a low rent home for previous veterans, and they don't have to be Canadian veterans, they're from around the world. And he spoke to someone who was in the Burmese military, someone who's in the Canadian military for 30 years. And so credit to him for doing that journalism. I read his piece. Listened to it. It was in French, but I still listen to it. But they're a nonprofit. They accept donations. So on Remembrance Day, if anyone's looking for a charitable donation, it's the Veterans Memorial Housing Society is the nonprofit, and they are doing just excellent work. So I would put any donations you can to them.
Very nice. Well, Katie, I will third the motion for Richard Zussman. He's been a great friend of the podcast, but also very talented journalist, and probably even maybe meets or exceeds Mike McDonald's incredible command of BC political trivia, which was on full display during our recent contest, which certainly left me completely in the dust. I thought I knew a few things, but I didn't know any of those. So best of luck to him. I hope he comes back to journalism. It's a loss to journalism, and again, for wherever he does wind up. I think it's next week he's in his last week anyway. This week,
yeah, it's next week.
Yeah. Okay. All the best to Richard Zussman. Thanks, Katie. To you.
I think instead of toasting, I think he would want us to raise a curling, some kind of curling metaphor, because he's into curling now. But I don't know curling well enough. Raise a broom. Yes. So raise a broom to Richard Zussman.
Raise a broom to Richard Zussman.
And if I may add one thing, Richard has actually redefined journalism in this place because the term Zussman has emerged. So Zussman referring to a question that contains multiple parts. That's a Zussman.
So yes,
the legacy continues.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. We're going to try to see if he will squeeze us into his calendar before he gets too busy with whatever it is he's doing next. Thank you so much, Katie, and to you, Wolfgang, and to Raj Sihota for joining us this week on Hotel Pacifico, and thank you to our sponsors for allowing us to bring you this episode for free. See everyone next week. BC, you can never leave.